Welcome back to part 2 of Understanding Gaslighting. As previously mentioned, gaslighting is the act or practice of grossly misleading someone, especially for personal advantage. We left off by saying that there are different types of gaslighting, and today we are going to explore two of them. The first is political gaslighting, and the second will be gaslighting and the media. The definition of political gaslighting is an attempt to distort the reality of the public to deceive them. Often we see this in news outlets, unreliable sources, and looking to undermine political opponents. We also see this in downplaying issues in society to establish control. One big area of this is fake news. We hear a lot of that recently, and political gaslighting originates in the 1930s and 40s during the time of World War II and also within the aftermath, which was followed by communism. During this time, we see an increase in gaslighting to establish certain values or political viewpoints. When examining a few more recent issues of gaslighting, we see this in Russia. President Vladimir Putin was a pioneer in political gaslighting because of his history. He has a history of abuse of online media. There are many reports that his team is creating what are called troll factories, which is essentially releases mass fake news and creates fear-mongering amongst his citizens. But on the other hand, we do have some legislators that are working against gaslighting. For instance, Prime Minister Theresa May of the United Kingdom created the Serious Crime Act of 2015, which works to protect victims of gaslighting. As of 2018, 314 people have been convicted of gaslighting. This lies within the laws of abuse within the United Kingdom. But one of the most well-known and talked about examples of political gaslighting is during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many political leaders and organizations reported that there were ample amounts of vaccines or that the virus was not as deadly or dangerous as the public perceived. One of the most prominent examples of this was former President Donald Trump's claims during the global pandemic, saying that it was affecting virtually nobody. But at that time 200,000 Americans had died from COVID-19. And this is an example of misleading the public in order to have your own personal gain. But when we talk about media, we've previously talked about the play Gaslight, followed by the movies Gaslight. But in more recent times, even though this is a minuscule example of gaslighting, it shows how even the simplest forms of gaslighting can be detrimental. In this context of The Office, one of the characters is asking someone to sabotage their opponent, and she responds by saying that she will misunderstand everything that the opponent says until it drives him insane, which is essentially manipulating him until he loses his sanity or until his reality is altered. More extreme examples, however, lie within the movie The Invisible Man, which is centered around a woman whose abusive husband has recently died, and she feels that he is still around and has faked his death. And whenever she expresses this to other people, they convince her that this is not real or that she is just paranoid and has PTSD from her abuse. When in reality, she was right all along, and in this dystopian tale, essentially her husband created a suit that allowed him to be invisible, and he was attempting to get back at her for leaving him. Finally, another recent example is in the movie Don't Worry, Darling, where a man puts his wife into a simulated world, and within the simulated world, she begins to have flashbacks of what her real life used to be. When she expresses this to neighbors and other people in the community, and even her husband, they say that this is wrong and that these are just dreams. They convince her that she's possibly sick and not feeling well. And when she notices other things and starts to create more uproar, they physically brainwash her to convince her that this is her real life. This is all to establish control over their wives and to reach their ultimate goal of maintaining this perfect society. Within this simulation, you can see through all these examples, they look to establish control over another group, whether that's a minority or a majority if we're looking at an entire population of citizens versus just a character in a movie. We can see that gaslighting is dangerous and that it can have serious effects on its victims. Thank you for tuning in.